Hi everyone, it's Ben from Greenlight Bookstore in Brooklyn. Thanks for tuning in to Author Spill the Beans. In this series, while we're stuck at home, we talk to authors about what they do and how they do it. Today we'll be talking about building a fantasy world. How do you create a universe where characters and places exist that you've never seen before with your own eyes, where things can happen that would never happen in the real world? Everything from flying on a shooting star to a talking guinea pig. Today we'll be talking to author Zoraida Cordova, who's written a novel called The Way to Real Luna. It's a fantasy story about Danny, an 11-year-old who's searching for his sister Pilly, who has gone missing after they were separated in different foster homes. Danny was sure that she was waiting for him in the magical kingdom from their favorite book growing up, and just when he's about to give up hope, he finds a mysterious book in the New York Public Library and a mysterious girl that help lead him toward another realm entirely and provide a magical map to his sister. As we hear from Zoraida, think about what a magical kingdom you make up might look like. Where would you want to live? What dangers would you face? What powers or treasures or surprises would be waiting for you there? Hi, Zoraida. Thank you so much for joining us for Author Spill the Beans.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to spill the beans.
Today we're talking about building a fantasy world, which is something you're no stranger to. You've written a lot of books about the supernatural, about mermaids and witches,
Yep.
a lot of fantasy. And this book, The Way to Real Luna, that we're talking about, is a middle grade action-adventure fairy tale story. The fantasy world that this book is focused on is based on a book that the main character, Danny, who's searching for his sister Pilly, have loved their whole life. So it's a book within a book by the same name, The Way to Real Luna.
Yep.
And I'm wondering, what is it about books you think that make them so potent and special for creating fantasy?
Children are very, very imaginative in a way that adults are not. I think that when we get older, we lose imagination and we lose the ability to believe in magic and believe in cool things, because being an adult is kind of boring.
Outlines the governing principles.
And we see a lot of that in the classics like Peter Pan, right? Like the kids who don't want to grow up. But specifically when it comes to books, I think that books are a safe way to explore anything that we might be afraid of. I'm scared of everything. And I was always a kid who was scared of everything. So books were a good way for me to have that sense of magic.
You wouldn't know you were scared of everything from the books that you write.
Right, exactly.
But I guess that's the point.
Yeah, exactly.
Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan, you reference and expand on a lot of these classic fairy tales in your book. Were fairy tales important to you when you were a kid, or these ones specifically, or did you look to any in particular for inspiration when you were building this fairy world?
I didn't look at them specifically. I knew that these stories were going to influence the book in general because I played with the idea of including actual missing passages from these properties, but then that got super complicated, and I just thought it would be more original if I created my own fairy tales. And creating your own fairy tales when you love fairy tales is like such a good exercise, because a lot of the time you're not referencing the things that you love, but they're already a part of you. I think one of my favorite ones is Alice in Wonderland. The concept that keeps getting into my books, either for younger kids or for adults or teens, is the idea of falling through somewhere and ending up in a magical place.
Goodbye, Dinah. Goodbye.
The whole world of Real Luna kind of operates within a structure of certain rules that you've created, magical rules like any other dimension has. Everything from like golden arrows and vines that are pointing Danny in certain directions to these portals to other worlds, which can exist in like tears in the air and rips in the sky and doors with actual keys, all these types of gateways. You said that that's been important to you, or it's a special concept for you, is always kind of looking for a gateway to another world. Can you tell us more about that?
I think that when I was a little kid, I was searching for the way out of here. I just wanted, I watched all of the fantasy movies with my brother when we were kids. Like, we watched Star Wars, but there's no way to get to, a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. But something like Narnia would be a lot more accessible. Or I was obsessed with this movie when I was a kid called The Warriors of Virtue, and this kid falls through it's like all about metamorphosis and change. And he falls through this whirlpool that takes him to a land where there are these like kangaroos that fight like Tai Chi. It's really weird, but it was one of those movies that I really loved. Or Sailor Moon, right, where a girl just uses like a compact mirror and she turns into something fantastical. So I've always been really drawn to those kinds of stories.
With Danny, he's also drawn to fantasy and magic from the beginning with his sister. And as he grows up, he kind of has to convince himself to keep believing in those things, especially as adults are kind of telling him that his obsession with magic is he needs to let it go and it's his mind playing tricks on him. Do you think it's important for kids to keep that belief in magic and in something beyond the strict reality?
Yeah, I think it's super important. I think that, there's a difference between lying to children and stomping on their creativity. And I think that we can foster a sense of there is magic in the world in everyday things, like the time of spring, that the way that trees change and flowers bloom, and the way that like even a sunrise and things like that, right? Things like that, when you're little are wow, like you still don't know the mechanics of it. And I think that the process of growing up is just learning the way that the world works and forgetting that there's like possibility. Or I recently watched this movie called Wendy, and it's by the same team that did Beasts of the Southern Wild, and one of my friends recommended it to me. And it is it's a non-magical retelling of Peter Pan, and it's more magical realism. And so these kids go, as soon as they let in doubt and fear, they stop being kids and they just grow up overnight and they turn into like old people.
Oh, I'm like the Crypt Keeper!
Allowing kids to maintain a sense of creativity is really important. When you lose all of those things, I think you lose a part of what makes everyday experiences wonderful.
Right.
And it just creates empathy. Danny is a kid that is very empathetic towards everyone around him because of his situation. And there is a thread in all middle grade literature where adults are the reason that kids suffer.
Who told you to stop working?
And so why would you want to be that when you grow up?
Well, I think, part of realizing how the real world works, like you're talking about, is kind of becoming aware of the danger and the sinister aspects of the world around you. And that is also kind of part of what Danny realizes is true about this fantasy world of Real Luna too. There's danger lurking where he didn't expect it from what he remembered of the stories as a kid. So I'm wondering if you think the creation of a convincing and true fantasy world kind of has to have those dangerous elements along with the more wonderful things that he was expecting, like flying on shooting stars.
Yeah, because it's a difference between believing in fantasy stories or loving fantasy stories and being naive, right? And I think Danny has experienced a different kind of evil, right? It's meanness and rudeness, and people who are selfish and cruel. But then there's the all powerful, queen of shadows, and people who want to rob kids of their shadows. Um, and so that's a different kind. He still has to be smart and aware, but he's realizing that there are downsides to um fairylands, and sometimes, even though it is a place that he wants to escape to, um it might not be better, or it might not be safer than living in the real world.
When you were creating this world that kind of also spans geography, like they travel far and wide, were you inspired by places that you've been, by the environment, any environments where you've traveled?
So I've been to, they go to Ecuador, they go to Brazil, and they go to Ireland. And I've been to Ecuador and Ireland, but I have not been to Brazil. I just sort of wanted, I'm from South America, I'm from Ecuador, and I just want to represent the continent a little bit, and just show the like beautiful parts of the landscape, and how those countries have really, really rich stories and mythologies. And when I went to Ecuador the last trip, we actually went to the place where Sinchi in the book lives, at the ruins of Ingapirca.
Since you being
And
the guinea pig.
yes,
Yes.
Sinchi the guinea pig, the talking guinea pig. And so I went to that area, and when I came to finding a place for Sinchi, I knew that it was going to take place there because it's so historic and so old, and beautiful. And I think that in my mind, I've always wanted to just write about my home country, in all of my books a little bit.
Were there any Ecuadorian fairy tales that were familiar and special to you?
So most of the fairy tales are of Spanish from Spain origin, and they get retold in Ecuador as well. There's some Inca stories that are really pretty, but I'm not. They don't tell us those as much in the city where I'm from. I'm from Guayaquil. Um, but I definitely grew up with my grandmother telling me bedtime stories. She gave me this book where it was an encyclopedia of like kids fairy tales and rhymes, and I read that book to death. It is, I still have it, and it's falling apart. But and it's in Spanish, and so I still read it. I still like look at it every now and then, just to practice my Spanish a little bit. But that book was full of fairy tales, and even though it was in Spanish, it had fairy tales from around the world. So I grew up with world fairy tales.
One of the central messages in the book comes from the character of Auntie North, I think, who tells Danny that there's a bit of truth in every great legend and myth. And she searches after legends and myths so she would know. What would you want the truth that kids who are reading The Way to Ria Luna take away?
I think that it would be that, when you believe in things like hope and magic, you have to share it with others. One of the reasons why, I don't want to spoil the ending, but one of the reasons why Danny and his friends are able to do like what they do in the end is because they have worked together and they have shared in this magic and in this search for magic, and for the book, The Keys of the Way to Real Luna. So I think is that, and some of the only way that I can survive a lot of things like deadlines and the pandemic are because of I'm sharing my experience with my friends, and so the connection is what really makes connection and friendship is what really makes things important for me.
And bearable and fun.
And fun, absolutely.
Thank you, Zoraida, so much for joining us for Author Spill the Beans. If anyone wants to buy The Way to Real Luna or any of Zoraida's books, you can go to greenlightbookstore.com and search for the title and add it to your cart and easily check out to ship the book right to your home. We're still fulfilling orders for direct-to-home shipping, and buying from an independent bookstore is a great way to support small businesses in your neighborhood or your state. So go to greenlightbookstore.com for more. Zoraida, thank you again so much. It was such a pleasure talking to you about this, and congratulations on the release of this book.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited for people to be able to read it.